Yo, everybody, welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of the upcoming Image series, Vanish. It's Ryan Stegman. Thanks for coming on, Ryan.
Thanks for having me. Excited to talk about it.
So, we're recording this on Tuesday, September 6th. Vanish is launching on September 21st.
Correct.
How's life? How are you feeling on the build-up?
You know, it's been been working on it for like a year. So it's kind of crazy that it's finally coming out. It does start to drive you crazy when you have all this stuff done and it's just piled up and it's not being released. So, the sales were really good. I think people are really excited. We've been getting a lot of really good reviews, and I think it's going to be a hit. So I'm pretty excited.
It does kind of seem like it's been a long time coming.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that was because the Substack or if it was because of just... I think you announced it shortly after leaving Venom or something, but it does kind of feel like an unusually long buildup. I imagine that feels even more so from the inside.
Yeah, I think that the Substack definitely is part of the reason. Like, I don't think Image would have let me go out there and crow about it as much. They'd have wanted to control like the announcement and everything a little more. But because we were doing that and kind of like letting people behind the curtain, we said a lot more than you normally hear about a book. So, and then also it's just taken us a long time. I mean, I'm a fairly fast artist, but I had to design everything up top, and we had to conceive of the whole thing, and we worked through the ideas, and there's a lot of design in this book. I mean, this is not just one character that I had to create. I had to create a whole universe essentially, and there's all kinds of different people that need to be on all the pages, and I'm kind of running a business here. I'm contacting people about doing covers and doing all these extracurriculars. So it just ended up taking a while to get really rolling on it, but now that we're rolling, we're moving quickly.
It adds up.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Okay, so I'm going to do the spiel about it because we're mostly here to talk about Vanish. We're going to have some other stuff at the end, but Vanish is your upcoming Image series with writer Donny Cates, JP Mayer on inks, Sonia Oback on colors, and John J. Hill on letters and design, and assorted other things, as I learned during the Substack discussion we had previously. But here's the solicit. Oliver Harrison was a mythical hero who slayed the greatest threat to his realm before even hitting puberty. But that was then. As an adult, Oliver leads an average cookie-cutter suburban life, aside from the fact that he's mentally unstable, massively paranoid, smokes like a chimney, and gets blackout drunk every night to hide from his horrific nightmares. Will the arrival of the superhero team called the Prestige prove his madness isn't all in Oliver's head? And what about all that epic fantasy crap from his childhood? Join us for a brutal as hell tale of magical worlds, gifted youth, evil sorcerers, superheroes, war, blood, guts, and death that punches you right in the face. I have to admit, I've never read the solicit before, but I have read the first issue. And when I was getting through like the average cookie cutter suburban life part, I was just like about to start adding my own commentary. And then you guys added your own commentary in the solicit. I was like, okay, this makes more sense. But anyways, I've read the first issue, and I mean this in a very complimentary way. And I know you've gotten this already. It's the most 90s comic I've read in a while, in a very good way. So I want to start with a very important question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much did you love Wizard Magazine?
Oh my God. I mean, that was my entry point into comics. So I've told this story before, but I started reading comics at I had read some before, but I wasn't really invested in like the whole thing. Like I didn't have a comic book store. I didn't have access to them, what have you. But I went to the store and I bought Spawn issues 46 and 47.
Oh my God. That is such an incredible origin point. Not just Spawn 1, Spawn 46 and 47.
Then, of course, I went back and bought everything Spawn. And one of those first times I went, I bought a Wizard magazine. And it was such a great little snapshot of the industry. And I learned everything about this comic book industry and the creators that made the stuff. And became just completely obsessed. And I had, then, from that point on, I'd get every single issue of Wizard. And, I'd check the top 10 hottest writers list. Like that was the big thing. I would read those things cover to cover too. I'd read the whole letters column with Jim McLaughlin and, all of every article about anything, even if I wasn't interested in it. So yeah, it was a big part of my, entry into comic books.
I have a massive stack over to my left, like in like 2 bins. There's just not every wizard I bought, but a lot of them. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it is interesting reading Vanish because in a lot of ways, it feels like a comic of today, but it also feels like a comic of today from the wizard / early to mid 90s Image era, where it's kind of like focused through that point where, you know, you have that passion for wizard, you have that passion for Image, you have this passion for like that certain era. And it is really interesting. But I mean, tying into that, were Wizard and Image basically your touchstones when you were first getting into comics? Were they kind of inseparable in your brain?
Yeah, I mean, I went backwards from Image to Marvel and DC and got into, you know, that stuff. I mean, I always liked Spider-Man, but I wasn't like a collector. Like,
Right.
Again, I didn't have a way to get the Spider-Man comics. So anytime I had one, I was very into it. But Image was absolutely like the thing to me. That's what I wanted to do and what I wanted to create. I think that Donnie and I are both children of that era. Like, we're both from the same school of thought. But I think that, you know, in retrospect, we can say that, like, you know, a lot of the Image stuff lacked a little bit of substance.
Sure.
So I think that I like to think that we have the aesthetic, but that we have a little more substance there. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, I don't want to get into spoilers, but there's probably the most important beat in the first issue, like the big turn in it, isn't just like 90s comics. It almost has like a 90s action movie aesthetic to it. There's like this turn in. That's the thing I think is really interesting about this book is it feels like, you know, a lot of times people say like this comic was a passion project. I mean, of course, all comics are passion projects. Nobody's doing this to necessarily get rich. Nobody's doing this to necessarily like become ultra famous or anything like that. So there's always a passion project element to that. But this feels like the totality of your and Donnie's like teenage years being put into a comic, but from your current adult lens, and it makes it really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I do that a lot in my work in general. Which is I try to make sure I don't lose sight of what I thought was cool when I was younger.
Right.
I'll often go through these phases where I try to do these clever covers, or, you know, try to get clever with what I'm doing on the interior of a comic book. And the response is always more tepid than when I just do what I think is like the coolest possible thing. And I enjoy doing the coolest possible thing. So I think that, you know, that's kind of, you know, when we set out to do Vanish, the first thing that I was thinking was those initial, and this, you know, any issue 1 cover, I try to think of the covers that really impacted me when I was growing up. But I just thought back to all those early Image #1s and what those covers looked like and how they, you know, set my hair on fire. And I was like, I have to have that specific thing for Vanish #1. I have to have that one cover that somebody sees it on the shelf and you know, a 15-year-old has to pick it up and be like, what is this? I have to see this now.
What were the covers that really lit your hair on fire when you were younger?
Well, obviously Spawn #1.
Yeah.
The Darkness #1. I've always loved that cover. I love like the single character they just give you enough story to, you know, to get you by, but it's just like a character looking badass. So, you know, one of the first things that I did when I started getting into comics was I recreated the Wildcats #1 cover. I wish I could find it because I drew it and then I inked it with a Sharpie. So I'm sure it looks like hell, but I thought it was, you know, I thought I was doing everything right at the time. So yeah, I mean, all of those, you know, Youngblood, Savage Dragon had some great stuff. Or, you know, Eric Larson always does the types of covers that I like with, you know, 2 characters fighting or somebody's fist flying at you, you know, all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, the Spider-Man #1 cover that McFarlane did is always a touchstone, specifically because it was next to my bed. I had the poster and I would lay on my side and I'd see it, you know, every night. So, you know, those are the types of things that I'm always trying to, you know, I just want that iconic image that really gets people excited.
I never actually thought of the fact that you were kind of in pursuit of cool, but it kind of makes sense now, of like evoking that feeling. Like, is that what it's really about? It's like with your art, you know, you can try to be cool. Trying to be cool is always difficult. I've been trying my entire life and I've been failing miserably. It seems to me that you want somebody to almost feel like you did when you were seeing like the darkness more. Actually, looking back at that cover, that actually evokes a lot of the feelings of Vanish #1. There's a lot there. Is it about making somebody feel like you did when you were a kid, basically, and be like, oh, damn, this is cool as hell?
Yeah, well, it's, you know, like that time in my life meant so much to me. I think that it's, you know, it's like when you're a kid, you like music, but you don't really have like
you don't know why.
Yeah. And then you hit a certain age and all of a sudden you start to really feel something from the music and it changes your whole life. And that becomes like a music that you'll never stop loving for the rest of your life. Well, this is, for me, I feel like I had moved around a bunch when I was a kid. We, you know, had settled in an area finally, and I had some difficult times, but then I like really found myself in this moment with comic books and these things that I thought were so cool. And it was my own thing. I wasn't sharing it with people. Like I didn't have anybody to share it with, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I would go to conventions by myself. I would draw by myself. I'd take stuff, you know, and it was like all of a sudden I had this identity. And so there's definitely a part of me that just wants to offer that to, you know, somebody of that age also. Like I want somebody to have that experience with what I've done. So I try to, you know, like I'm definitely trying to evoke that for somebody and give them their sort of, you know, coming of age moment, I guess.
So we're going to get into like the meat of Vanish here in a second, but I did want to actually ask about you and Donnie, because I don't know Donnie that well, but I kind of get the impression that as far as like writer-artist teams, you two align unusually well. Like, you both work well together, but it seems like you also have similar sensibilities and roots even, which adds up quite nicely because your projects feel like, I don't know, it's like the faux cartoonist idea that Kieran Gillen came up with about him and Jamie McKelvey. You guys have that, except for a much different sensibility than them. Why do you think that you two pair so well? Is it because of those reasons I said?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, we just had, like, the very first time we spoke, well, we had met at a convention briefly before, but when we really spoke for the first time about Venom, and he was pitching me the ideas, it was like, oh my God, these are the things that I want to draw. You know, I didn't even necessarily know prior to that I wouldn't have called myself like a huge Venom fan.
Oh man, which is crazy because of what we're talking about previously. That's like right in your spot.
Yeah. I don't know how I missed out on that or why. Yeah, it just never really hit me. And then he started telling me his ideas, and I was like, well, this is the type of stuff I want to draw. And then I started drawing it, and it felt like this is, you know, I was meant to do this. And I guess that's probably just, you know, similar aesthetic. I think that we both have like very, Donnie's wife calls it boy comics. Like that's what we make. And I think that that's probably accurate. You know, I don't necessarily mean to, but that's just like, you know, the way that the stuff that I like. So, and he's the same way. We just like the same type of stuff. And so, and also I think that over this time, you know, it's been 3 or 4 years now, we've also sort of grown towards the center, you know, like anything that, like we've kind of grown together as one being, so to speak. So, you know, you kind of get like an amalgamation of both of us when you see the final product.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get into the specifics on Vanish. It probably has the most interesting theoretical origin story of anything I can ever recall reading. I read that this started with Donnie's take on Stegman and his amazing friends about how Harry Potter sucks.
Yes, absolutely.
How in the world did that lead to Vanish? I mean, besides the fact that there's like the Chosen One story.
Well, so, I mean, one of his main points was, and I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. Yeah. My son is named Harrison after George Harrison, but we also call him Harry, and it was kind of like, whoa, best of both worlds, because my wife and I love Harry Potter. But he's going on this rant, and one of his main points was, it's really fucked up that they are enlisting these kids in a war. Like, why can't the adults just fight their war? And it makes perfect sense. And then, you extrapolate from that, it's the same with the X-Men. It's the same with all these types of stories with these kids where, and there's a chosen one and they're put into like this traumatic situation of war. And it really, it's just kind of crazy. So then that led us to, well, what if we do the story about how this fucked the character up, in the end, because it's a trope, it's a common theme in books, but nobody, we don't really have a story about the aftermath, what that's like for this person who would clearly have some major trauma going forward after having been forced into killing people as a child, So, I mean, once he called me after that show and he said, "Hey, I have an idea." And then he started saying that, and I was like, "Oh, that's like timeless. That's like something that's not really done. We can just take these things that we love and then turn it into something else." And that's pretty much what we did.
Well, you and I are both big sports fans, and obviously, the vast majority of athletes do not kill people. I have to say, vast majority, unfortunately, but. The interesting thing about that is like a thing that I think about a lot is like what happens to athletes after they retire, because it's like, let's say Reggie Miller is a bad example. Like, let's say Ben Wallace, like I have no idea what Ben Wallace is doing today, but he's probably always kind of comparing himself to like that time where he was at the top, the depoy defensive player of the year multiple times. He was like on the one of the best teams in the league, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know. Your life is always compared to this moment where you're at that height. And it's got to be a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety in these people's lives that you don't really think about. It's funny because like I've thought about that a lot, but I've never thought about that chosen one life. Like what comes next for that chosen one? And that is a really interesting angle, because either you fail at it and your life sucks because the world is horrible, or you succeed at it and your life sucks because you succeeded at something terrible. And it's really interesting reading Vanish for that reason, because I had never considered that as like storytelling territory. I love how you merge it together with the idea of like superheroes in our world, because of like, I don't know, it almost feels like there's characters that see narrative in our world and see that as opportunity. Right.
Yeah, I think that that's exactly what, we were going for, is just you see all those stories, because even more than the sports thing, because the sports thing, you're not, I mean, like Oliver is, or the main character is, 13 or whatever when the story technically starts. And you see like a child star, there was that big period where we saw how this affected kids growing up, and it really messed them up. Now, imagine if you were a child star because you were a killer. Like it would be crazy. But there's also one of the fun things about this book is, I mean, you've only read the first issue. Like you can't even see where it's going yet. Like where the story ends up going, I mean, it gets really twisted, and it's really pretty mind blowing where some of the places Donnie's taking it.
It is interesting because my mind initially, when I read it, I was like, this is going to be a short book, because in my mind, I'm trying to think of a way to say this that isn't a spoiler, which I'm sure is a common problem for you as well. But Oliver gets a mission at the end of that where he knows what he needs to do, and he has to go and do it. And there's a limited number of things theoretically on his list. I think I'm doing a good job of this.
Yeah.
That inherently in my mind would make it seem finite, but I suspect, well, obviously, like, there's going to be more to the story. And I suspect it has something to do with the title. Let's bring that up. So the title is Vanish.
Mm-hmm.
The main villain in an early part of the story from a flashback is this character named Baron Vanish.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say he's occupied with other things.
Yeah.
Why did you name it Vanish?
You're getting into such spoiler territory.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, it'll make sense in the end.
Okay.
There is, so we have 8 issues planned, right?
Right.
I know exactly how it ends. That will give you every reason that it's called Vanish. Now, having said that, it opens up a whole new avenue of possibilities to continue the story if it's successful. but the first 8 is very final in a sense. And when you see it, everything I'm saying, all this rambling will make sense. But there's also, plenty of room for it to be an ongoing series, which is really cool. Like it really has a perfect jumping off point for more, which would be really fun.
I love it. Well, I have to admit, tying back into the early stuff, the stuff about the 90s, I've always had an affinity for stories about good guys having to be bad, like the antihero types and stuff. I mean, I grew up, I was a big Cable guy. I never knew if Cable was good or bad. I was a big Deadpool guy, Joe Kelly and Ed McGuinness. I knew in my head that I enjoyed Deadpool, but I also knew that maybe being an assassin is a bad thing.
Right.
There's something alluring about that, and Vanish handles that nicely. Where did that come in? Was that just kind of a natural wrinkle of like the what comes next for the Chosen One type thing, or is that something that just kind of built as you and Donnie were talking?
Well, I mean, Donnie and I just finished Venom, and he's clearly, one of the ultimate antiheroes. Now, we will be subverting the antihero thing even in this, and doing something with it that nobody's going to see coming, which I can't get into. But I think that that's just what we do. I think that goes along with our, I've said it before, and I don't mean it to be derogatory, but it's Donnie and Ryan bullshit, like what we do. Yeah. This is what we do. This is the type of thing that we like. And I don't know that we ever discussed it like necessarily where we're like, he has to be an anti-hero. It's just what happens when we get together and we work this stuff out. So, however that happens, it just happens.
I do think it's funny though, because when you look at all the reviews and everything, all the things say 90s, 90s, 90s. It talks about all these very specific details. And I guess up until this moment, I never really considered that could have just been set up for where it's actually going to go.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, I think there's a lot of depth here. And that's I don't bristle at, like, it being called 90s because that's clearly our aesthetic.
Right.
But it has some crazy layers to it that most stuff from that era wouldn't have had. And it's, it's nuts.
So, going back into the origins of it all, did you and Donnie know that after Venom, you wanted to do something together that was your own?
Yes, that decision was made well before we finished Venom. We batted around several ideas, and none of them were sticking. Like you're throwing these things at the wall. We'd actually get kind of far down the road with it and be like, "Ooh, this is," and then. Once he said, the thing about what happens to the Chosen One after, all that, and that one stuck right away, and we knew that we had something. And then that's when he came up to visit, and we hashed the whole thing out in my office, and spent like a week doing it. And he, that we were still working on Venom at the time. He was sitting in the lazy boy that's right off over there writing scripts, and I was drawing issue 200, and we would take time also to work on Vanish. So it was a plan all along, yeah, for sure.
How many non-starters did you have? Like, how did you go down any paths before going towards Vanish?
Probably 2 or 3. I think it was probably 2 that were like we took beyond. Just a preliminary discussion. I can't even remember what they are, honestly, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Because they were the type of ideas. That's the problem that you end up having is that you realize all of a sudden it's not sticking because there's no hook, And so, we tried to shoehorn some stuff in, and it just didn't quite work out. And then this one, it just stuck right away.
Basically, you guys. You had that hook. You knew after having that discussion on the podcast that maybe there was something there. Mm-hmm. So then you go up, you have your conversation, you spend a week together where you're just kind of batting around ideas. I don't know, whiteboarding this stuff. You guys don't seem like whiteboard types. Maybe you're whiteboard types and I don't know it.
Well, we didn't have a whiteboard this time, but we've done I went to the Absolute Carnage Summit. I went to the King in Black Summit, and
Whiteboard City.
We had a third person there who was whiteboarding. This time it was more he would type stuff on his computer, and I'd sit there and I had a big fat marker, and I was just drawing crazy stuff for it.
And now, a quick word from our sponsor. It's Bad Idea, and they are back. And this time, I really mean it. It's Bad Idea 2 Part 1, which sounds crazy, but hear me out. This first wave of 7 titles with 15 releases includes fantastic creators like Ramon Villalobos, Tamara Bonvillain, Joshua Dysart, Alberto Ponticelli, and more on superbly titled comics like Escape from Wyoming, a future winner for the best named comic Eisner. Want to read those titles and more? Presumably, at some point, visit Bad Idea's site and find the Bad Idea store nearest you and make the magic happen. And now, back to the show. What was that experience like? Because I'm always interested in like the development part. Was there a version of that week-long get-together where this comic doesn't come out of it, or were you guys pretty set at that point?
I think we were pretty set. We knew that the concept was so strong, and that we had the elevator pitch in hand. You know, you can't kind of you definitely it's a hard thing to do. It's a really hard part of the process when you're creating something to have an elevator, like an actual, this is what it is, this is the whole thing, we're going to build from this, and you tend to fight that. You want to start with like all your big ideas, and then you're like, I'll find the elevator pitch later, and that almost never works. You know, so once we had, you know, we said Harry Potter meets Inglourious Bastards meets The Boys, you know, something like that, and then we had the, you know, the Chosen One trope. It was just like laser focus, straight arrow ahead from there.
It seems like it was a good indicator that you were pretty much immediately drawing. Like you could start seeing it in your head. Is that a good sign for you? Oh
yeah, like a lot of the characters I just did one pass and we were like, yeah, that's it. I mean, not Oliver Harrison, not Baron Vanish. Those ones took a little while longer because there had to be something new aesthetically about them that you haven't really seen before. But the you know, a lot of it was just like, yep, that's the character, that, you know, and I was able to nail it right out of the gate.
As a person who really hates spiders, I hate you for making Baron Vanish have spider legs on his body.
Yeah, well, that, you know, he needed something.
He didn't need that. He didn't need that.
I made those legs hairy too, so you feel that texture.
Oh yeah, they're real hairy. I looked at that and I was like, I don't like this guy. This guy is I mean, he was obviously the bad guy, but he was extra bad in my book because he had the spider legs. But I actually, you know, it's funny, with creator owned, I always think of these as like, you know, especially with the amount of buildup you had. I think about like character sheets and character designs and all this stuff like that. But I read in an interview that you actually designed a character that's on the cover to number 4, a cover I haven't actually seen yet. But you didn't just design it on the cover or for the cover. You designed it in the process of drawing the cover.
Yeah.
Which seems really wild. Like, what is your typical design approach? Or do you have one? Is it just like flowing basically?
Typically, there's characters that I just have such a great handle on that I know that if I just start drawing it, it's going to happen.
Like, do you have a kind of, not drawn in your mind, but like characteristics you want there before you get there?
Yeah. And I don't know why that happens sometimes. It just does. Like, I mean, Null was basically that. I did a couple head sketches of Null. Never showed what his whole body was going to look like before I drew him on the page. But I just knew what it was going to look like. And then seeing it all rendered, I turned it in and they were like, that's perfect. You know, there's other times, you know, like Oliver Harrison, where I sat there and I banged my head against the wall. I wanted, you know, this and this, and I kept trying to shoehorn things in, and you know, drew probably, I'd say 100 different versions of him, and finally nailed it down. You know, just, I don't know how. It's a weird process. It's actually a very frustrating process. That it's not because when I'm drawing a page, I know this linear process. I lay it out, I draw it, then I render it like I do pencil rendering, and it's always moving forward. Design is much like writing, where it's move forward, go backwards, move forward, go backwards, and then sometimes throw the whole thing in the trash, start over. And it's maddening because you're just like, I don't have a thing now. I haven't made anything today. There's nothing that I'm using today. But, it keeps the wheels spinning, and you keep working at it until you have something.
I don't want to make assumptions, but previously you've only done for hire. And I mean, obviously there's Noel, but is design something, is that a skill set you've really had to like focus on because of so much of the stuff that was like pre-existing almost?
I think that design is very much a separate skill from drawing comic book pages, and it definitely takes you can get better at it through practice, but you have to practice that specific skill.
Mm-hmm.
And learning even how to find inspiration. Like I've learned over time how to make an inspiration board, and how to, because if you just are using the things that you already know, you're going to end up drawing the same, variations on the same thing over and over. So it's very much it's like I said, it's a different skill. I honestly believe it feels closer to writing than it feels to drawing sometimes, where it's, it's more so subjective. But it's, in all creative pursuits, it's one of those things where you just have to keep working at it until you get better at it.
Is that because, does it feel more like writing because you have to make, for Oliver, he's got like I don't even know what to call it. I don't know. Sigil. Yeah, the sigil. Like, he's got that for his house up there, and he's got his Sergeant Pepper and the Lonely Hearts Band, Harry Potter Hogwarts jacket or cloak that he's wearing. And those elements are both like costume, but they're also story. Is that why it's writing in your mind to a certain degree?
Yeah, and again, like just the subjectivity, like when you write something, you have no idea if it's good. Like you just don't.
Oh, sure, I gotcha.
I can't look at the words on the page and say that's well written, I just have to like rely on other people to tell me if I did a good job. Whereas a drawing, I see it, I know I did, at least I did the best I could. I feel very objective about when I draw something, if it's good or bad.
Oh, and you've been doing it your whole life. And so it's like, it flows, it looks cool, this. But with the other things, it's like, does that work? That's a question you don't know.
And also, like I said, like going backwards on a drawing is just not something I generally have to do. But that's what you have to do with design. And that's what you have to do with writing. Writing is rewriting, they say, Design is basically redesigning the thing that you've already started. You've gotten to a point, and then you're like, the only element I like is this element. Now I have to
build around that.
Everything away. Yeah, and keep that element, and then you'll find another element that, you have to figure out.
Well, that's what I think what is interesting about the character that's on issue number 4. I wish I could stop referring to him as that. I have no idea what the character's name is, but the thing that's interesting about that is because you designed it on the page and you went in with your idea in your head. Initially, I thought that seemed unusual, but I guess considering the fact that you are going for like I want this to be cool vibe, overthinking it is kind of the opposite of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you want to have that feeling, like when you're bringing it on the page, it's like that initial design to a certain degree. While you want it to be accurate for what you want the character to be, you also want people to look at it and be like, "This is cool."
Well, absolutely. I mean that's the most important thing to me. I had to have something that really, jumped off the page. But I mean, I think that one of the interesting things about design is that you don't see all the fuck ups and the screw ups that I had along the way. You just see the final one. Well, the final one is fairly simple. It's tape with a mask that sewn together with some feathers on the shoulder. Like that's the design. But I tried so many other things. I just ended up with a simple design that looks cool.
Yeah.
But really, so I think that part of the balancing act is finding a way to make it look like you didn't overthink it, even though I overthought it to hell and back. You know what I mean?
That's basically my life motto right there. Were there spikes involved at any point?
No spikes. I did try to figure out how to get chains involved, but it just didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
There's a scene in the first issue where there are chains because it's important to us that we represent the chain. The
Kids
chain
love
lovers.
chains.
They love them, and there will be some chains going forward on some other characters, but the main character didn't end up with any chains.
I do think it's interesting, though, because you're not just designing the cast. You also have to design, like, the world. Like, in the first issue, there's, like, the land that this Chosen One character kind of resides in. It's called Everkeep. And it's not just about designing, like, villains and heroes and everything like that. You also have to design the world. And I think that's, I don't know, did that feel different? Or is that kind of less crucial because it's mostly built around the real world?
So that shot of Everkeep, I felt like was crucial to everything. I thought that was very important, that place looked alien and yet familiar, that it had a vibe to it that you hadn't seen before.
An appropriate amount of dragons.
Appropriate amount of dragons, correct. And I think that, honestly, I'm very proud of that because that was really freaking hard to do. And, but I think that the whole thing would have not been as, the whole first issue really hinges on what that place looks like and letting you know that this is not, the
alleyway you previously were in.
You haven't been here before. This book is a place you've never been before. That's like a thing that my favorite artists do that I think is, my favorite thing that artists do, which is I want to go into a comic book and go into that artist's world. I want that to feel like their characters are real to me, even though they don't look like real people, because, if they're a little bit cartoony or whatever, but they feel like that person's characters, that person's environments. And so this book, I actually, I really took it upon myself to try to, even in the alleyway scene, I think I put more pipes than...
There's a lot of pipes.
Yeah.
I was observing that last night.
I was just making up my own pipes. Like, I was like, I'm going to create, my own aesthetic and my own world here. And Everkeep is clearly like the crux of that.
I do think it's interesting, though, because I don't know, everything about it feels... I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase it. I mean, it's like everything feels very lived in. And both in Everkeep and in the reality, but it's also like, because of the pipes, it does kind of give it this like hyper reality to it, where it just feels like more. And I think that's it seems like that's kind of the aesthetic, where it's just like you want it to feel. It's almost less about like how would this building's water systems work. It's more about how do I make this look cool. It goes back to cool.
Yeah, it's texture. Like it's texture. You can feel that world. Well, I want you to be able to feel that world when you're in it. And that's just me trying to transport you to this place that we want to transport you to.
This is a very minor spoiler, but I'm upset with you about how good at drawing vomiting you are.
I didn't know until I drew that, but apparently I think that might be my first vomit scene. So.
Well, you nailed it. If there's an Eisner for best vomit scene, you're going to totally dominate it this year. Okay, I want to talk about the Substack of it all, because it is interesting to think about this in the scope of the fact that most of the time when all this stuff is happening, we don't see it. It's just like one day Vanish comes out and we're like, cool, Vanish is here now. We're going to read that. This is great. Instead, you guys are maniacs and you launched KLC Press last August, and that meant the development of Vanish was largely done in front of everyone's eyes. Mm-hmm. How did that change the experience for you? Like, do you feel like Vanish is materially different because it went through that process?
No. I think that I would have found a way to share this process if it wasn't for the Substack. It just so happened that kind of came along at the perfect time, in order, that we were able to show it. But I think that it would have been on social media. It would have been on, podcasts, whatever we were going to do, we were going to find a way to share this process.
When you also talked about doing a Kickstarter for it, like Scott Snyder and Tony Daniels one for Noctera, right?
Right. Yeah. It was. Yeah. We wanted to have a way to connect with fans while the process was happening. And we had discussed, multiple ways of doing that. And this, just kind of like came out of the blue and was like, well, this is exactly what we wanted to do anyway. So yeah, let's do it.
Do you feel like Vanish came out when it was always going to come out, or do you think the Substack stuff, complicated it to a certain degree?
I don't think it complicated it at all. No, I think that we complicated it.
In what sense?
Just, overthinking things, there were so many pitfalls of, dealing with stuff that I don't normally have to deal with because I have an editor, just those things. I think that, the book is ready now, and we have 4 issues done, and that's all that matters. But yeah, I think that I've learned a lot about the process during this process.
And now, a quick word from one of off-panel sponsors. Macroverse is a next-generation digital comics platform, and one with an astonishing number of comics, with currently over 50 series from over 100 creators on their app, with a 5-star rating both on Apple and Google's app stores. Download the app and binge all their titles, including the Eisner-nominated Remind from Jason Brubaker, Lisa K. Weber's Hex 11, which has been described as Harry Potter meets Blade Runner, or the new queer supernatural adventure series Husk that launches on November 1st. It's just $4.99 a month to subscribe to Macroverse, with proceeds directly supporting the creators on the platform. Keep an eye on the future of Macroverse too, as 2022 is going to bring an epic upgrade that offers a new level of digital collectability and more, with early adopters able to sign up for more information at macroverse.com. And now, back to the show. In regards to what you're talking about, it seems like you're not talking about the Substack part as much as the having your own creator-owned series part, which is obviously way different. You don't have an editor. You mentioned that. There's like doing your own thing. It's like building your own world, having to decide paper stock, having to decide all the variants, having to find artists for all the variants, et cetera, et cetera. What's the biggest thing you learned, you've had to learn about tackling your own creator-owned series? Besides the fact it's exhausting.
I think that, and this has been like a multi-year process of really learning how good editors are at their jobs.
Yeah.
Not that, we have a project manager. We didn't necessarily have an editor. And I don't think that an editor would have, made this that much different. But when I'm working for Marvel and stuff, once I started going to the creative summits, like I said about King Absolute Carnage, and I learned in that moment, I'd been working for Marvel for 15 years at this point, and I just kind of felt like the editor was somebody who I just turned in pages to and they said good. Mm-hmm. Like that's kind of what my relationship was. I mean, we would talk and we were friendly, but I didn't know what their real job was. So I went to this summit and realized how much creative input they have and how they mold the story with the writers. And I was like, wow, that's really impressive. I didn't know that they were, so involved in that sense. Now, because I'm doing this book, I realize how much pressure they take off of me, where I don't have to answer these questions. I don't have to know, all these things that I now know, because they just take care of it behind the scenes. If I say I'm going to be late on an issue, they're like, okay, thanks for letting us know. And then they go fix things, and I don't see any of that. I don't know what they have to go through for that. Whereas now, when I screw up, a deadline, I see how that affects everything.
Right.
And it's a bummer. So, it's been good to learn that. But I didn't really expect all those things.
I do think it's funny. There's of all the roles in comics, and I know somebody's going to yell at me for saying this, but of all the roles in comics, that meme where it's like what people think my job is versus what my job actually is? Mm-hmm. I feel like editors probably have the biggest gap between those two, where it's most of the time I feel like editors come up when people feel like they screwed something up. And in reality, it's like, especially for the big two, a lot of times they are, so crucial to the processes, but also like the creative development of things that, I don't know. I don't think people really recognize that. Maybe they shouldn't. Maybe most people are just going on Wednesday and they just want to pick up their Venom issue or whatever and just be happy about it. But at the same time, it is interesting to hear that from your perspective, because I never really thought about that for like an artist like yourself. It's like, You're right. They're the person you make sure you get your pages to, but until you go to that retreat and you see that in person, I don't know. That would be a wildly different experience.
Think about how closely I worked with them, and yet I had no idea.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Actually, you brought up something I wanted to talk about. We are in an era where artists are penciling and inking themselves as that's just a constant. Like most everyone, well, not most everyone, but a lot of people do. You work with JP on inks. Like, why do you prefer to keep it to just pencils? Why are you the pencil guy?
I'm too impatient. I find that when I ink myself, it looks about 75% as good as I want it to, because I don't know if it's ADHD, I don't know what you would call it, but I start rushing. I don't feel like I take my time with it. And I find it unenjoyable as a result. Like I when I get into like a groove or a flow state with inking, it's the best. It's a great feeling where you are thinking about the lines that you're making, what they mean, why you're doing them. But I tend to it's like almost like by the time I would be inking a page in a day, I am tired at that point. And I don't feel like I maintain the quality throughout. And especially my stuff's pretty labor intensive. Like I put a lot of lines. And so I've found that JP essentially inks me the way that I would ink myself if I was not this way. Mm-hmm. So if I can have sort of the best of both worlds this way, where I can do the stuff that I feel like I stay invested in, and then he takes it from there and makes sure that I don't fuck it up myself.
Yeah, there's no way to really speed through inking, it seems, because it has to dry, which is a problem. It is interesting though, because like seeing your finished penciled pages, like a good example is like you have the raw cover for, I forgot what it is, like cover G or something for your Vanish cover where it's just pencils. You don't take a lot of plays off when it comes to the old penciling.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why I'm like that. I definitely am obsessive, and I know that there's probably a quicker way that I could get through it, but I just kind of enjoy that process. So
I don't know if you're quite Jeff Darrow, but you're closer to Jeff Darrow than most.
Yeah, there's too much.
That guy, all-time great art book title, Lead Poisoning. What a genius. Oh, yeah. It's so good. It's so good.
Everything he does is genius, I think.
But, okay, so tying into this, you said you've been working for Marvel for 15 years. This is your first creator-owned book. It's interesting to see how you've evolved over that time. Like, actually, I have to admit, the other day, a comic that came up that I never expected to come up again, mostly because I actually didn't know it existed. And I apologize for the accidental diss that I brought to this book because I didn't know you worked on it. It was Fear Itself, Hulk versus Dracula. A comic that sounds absurd, probably was absurd, but had your art. That was 2011. And like looking back on that, like you still see you, but you've evolved a lot.
Yeah.
How do you feel like you've grown most as an artist between like, your early days at Marvel to now when you're about to launch Vanish?
I mean, I think that it's been a constant evolution. If you look at any era of what I've done, it's completely different than another. And I think it's about, I'm obsessive about getting better, about learning new stuff. I try not to go stale, because I personally, I don't like it when artists do that. I don't want them to do the same thing over and over. I want to see them evolve and get better. So, I mean, I don't know if I could point to a specific thing that I do better, but I think that everything is I'm just better at all of it. I think, I just think that I've grown and grown and grown and kept going. And I would say that maybe first and foremost, the number one thing that I'm probably way better at is rendering and having my own rendering style. I think that some of the understructure drawing is probably similar to what I do now. It's just that I didn't really render it very well, but I've changed the way that I do so many things that I think that I remember when Frank Martin, he colored Fear Itself, and when I started doing Venom, he came and colored me, and he wrote me one day and he's like, man, because it had been 10 years in between him working with me, maybe less, I don't know, 8 years or something. And he just wrote, and he's like, "You've gotten way better."
Did he say what he meant? He just meant just in general, you're way better.
Yeah, this is way better.
It's interesting looking back on your earlier work and looking at it now. The interesting thing is I think that all the technical elements you've refined yourself on, but you've maintained the energy, which is a really tough line to walk.
Yes. The energy is, to me, like number one most important factor. Like, I want my stuff to look like it breathes on the page. And, when you're looking at it, like it's moving, even though it's not moving. And if I ever come across something that I feel like takes away from that, then I stay away from doing that.
Do you think part of this learning process about yourself and kind of changing everything, do you think part of it is also getting a better feel for the stories you wanted to tell?
Yeah, well, that's a funny thing, is that I didn't realize that I would want to be doing this sort of dark stuff that Donnie and I do. I think of myself as more of like a happy-go-lucky kind of, silly person, but
I kind of always thought of you as like a Spider-Man guy.
Yeah, I mean, but I like the dark Spider-Man stuff.
Yeah.
Know? I mean, like Superior Spider-Man, I did that, and that was very dark. I think that I tend to enjoy drawing really dark stuff. I've found the more horror aspects of Venom, I really felt like I leaned into, and I really understood those things better than I would have thought. So
it is interesting going from Venom, where there's naturally like, it's a Marvel book, so you can't go hardcore, or you can't go as hardcore as you might want, to this. The violence is probably going to be have a higher ceiling in Vanish than it did in Venom, perhaps.
Way higher. You've seen it.
Yeah, I mean, but still, it's like the first issue, I mean, besides like, a very large explosion, and okay, never mind, there's some violence in there, but it's not as violent as I feel like you probably will get, because I kind of feel like, I don't know, it's like you're settling in the first issue. You kind of got to give everybody a feel, and then like once that starts, it can ramp up a bit.
There is some pretty wild violence coming up for sure. I don't know if the worst of it is. No, I'd say the worst of it is probably in issue 3. But it gets increasingly insane.
I was going to say, for some readers, it might actually be the best of it. Some people really like their violence.
Apparently I like it. So.
Apparently. Yeah, you're secretly like dark Ryan Stegman. You're like the evil version of yourself you didn't know existed. But
yeah,
I wanted to talk about one of the last things I want to bring up for Vanish is, okay, so the book has 10 regular variants ranging from your A cover, Daniel Warren Johnson's B cover, which, good job getting Daniel Warren Johnson because he's the best, and a blank sketch cover, all the way to your 1 to 500 incentive raw cover by you that's just your pencils, which I mentioned already. And then, I didn't actually know this, but there's also like a ton of retailer exclusive variants. I didn't count them because there was a lot, and I'm bad at counting. That's like secretly one of my great weaknesses, is I'm terrible at counting. But it feels very fitting of this book that there are all these covers and all the different variations within. But that, with all those covers, that always strikes me as one of those things that's probably like low key hard, like trying to find the right artist, trying to get like the right approach to it. How did you approach deciding the right mix and the right artist to feature on this first issue? Because I don't know, that stuff is often essential to the success of a book.
Well, I've definitely, took advantage of the friendships and connections that I've made over the years. Because, we have an Ed McGuinness cover, who's one of my all-time favorites. We have a Capullo cover, one of my all-time favorites. And I have a direct line to these guys, so I just got to ask them to do them.
Right.
There's Daniel is like a close friend of mine, and I knew I wanted him to do it. And I thought, who better to do, he whips he whips his art out so fast. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So he's going to be doing variants on all the issues.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Every issue will have you can order. It's not even an incentive. It's just you can order my cover or his cover. Yeah. And then the store variants, the stores choose. I mean, we can veto, but we don't. Like most of the stuff we were cool with.
Like they choose the artist?
Yeah, they do everything. They
what?
Just they come to us with, here's who we want to do it. Here's their layout, and we go with it.
So they just like pitch you. They're just like, I would like one, I don't know, Nick Robles, please. And then you're like, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, they'll usually have talked to the artist already. And that's just how that works. But yeah, the other ones, I obviously wanted, like I said, I think about those Spawn covers that Capullo used to do back in the day, and that's definitely something I was trying to emulate with what I did on this on the issue 1 cover, because he would always do those Spawn covers that were like just Spawn looking cool.
Yeah.
And so it's like I want Capullo to come in and make Vanish look cool, which he did. And then, again, like I said, I'm just friends with Ed, asked him, and he was all about it. So I have the original art sitting right over there.
Nice.
Pretty great. Yeah.
Calling in favors. That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting because, I don't know. Variants are like a fascinating game. It's a lot of variants. And it really kind of changes the arithmetic on the store exclusive ones, because I had no idea that's how it worked this entire time. I thought that was like something that was like approached in the opposite way. And
no, that'd be insane.
I was trying to, I was like, was most of your job for the last year just been finding artists for all those covers? Because holy shit.
Yeah, no, they do it, and they come to me, and I actually really enjoyed that. I thought that was cool.
That is cool. Oh, I mean, it's interesting to see. I imagine it's interesting to see who other people want to see drawing your character.
Right. Yeah. And then some of them, like artists I haven't even heard of, and then I get to see them do my character, and I'm like, ooh, I like this artist now.
Yeah. Okay. So to close, I actually wanted to bring up something I read. You're also apparently writing an upcoming Image book.
Yes.
Obviously, you can't talk about it because there's literally nothing about it out there. But I am interested in, you're busy. You got covers. You were just finishing a commission before we started talking. You were also laying on the ground because you were tired from doing that. These are busy things you have to do. You got Vanish. You got more stuff coming down the line. That's a lot of stuff going on. Why did you also want to throw your hat in the writing game?
I've always wanted to be a writer artist. That's always been a dream, and I've written a lot of stuff for people. Just most recently, I wrote a Miracle Man 5-page story for this Miracle Man Zero that'll be coming out. And I have like a pitch in over there that hopefully we get rolling on soon. So I actually had this idea for this book prior to doing Venom. I actually had it approved. I was going to go write and draw the series over at Image, and then they, talked me into doing Venom. Obviously, it was a good choice overall. And then I just had this pitch that I'd worked out, and I thought it was really good. And I've just been sitting on it, and finally kind of realized I'm probably not going to get to it anytime soon. So, I went ahead and hired an artist, and, it's Tyrell Cannon, and he's been working on it, and I can't say too much, but yeah, we're almost done with issue 2 actually. So
he is a great fit for your general vibe.
Yeah, there you go. I agree.
That's one of the things I think is interesting, because trying to think of a way to say this without starting the writer versus artist debate on Twitter. The interesting thing about artists is because artists can really only draw one book a month, and this, unless they're Chris Somney, he doesn't count. You can only draw one comic a month, so it's like really limiting to how many of your ideas you can execute. And I think that's the interesting thing is like, you're a storyteller. You have ideas, you have things stories you want to tell. At a certain point, it's like you almost have to also become a writer, because you won't be able to execute all of your other ideas otherwise. I mean, you talk about Daniel Warren Johnson. He was writing Jurassic League. Somebody in your region, Scotty Young, he like writes more than he draws at this point. And it's understandable, because there's only so many things you can do in a month if you're just drawing, unless you just like are constantly like drinking coffee and like not worried about your health or something.
Right. Yeah, no, I that's exactly right. I love drawing. I love it. Like, it's my favorite thing in the world. But I have more ideas, and I want to get more stuff out there, and this is the way to do it.
Well, and I think that's one of the interesting things that came up when we were talking about Substack, not for this chat, but previously, is when you're doing your own thing, a lot of it isn't just drawing. It's like, when you're writing, you're writing, but also when you're doing a creator-owned book, it's like you have to come up with all these decisions. You have to decide, like, which paper stock do we want to do? Which of this do we want to do? And like that's another one of those things that people don't really think about, is you have to take time from the art to make these decisions, which complicates things.
Yeah, it definitely. I have a co-writer on this particular project too. That's helps me get through the things that.
That is nice.
Yeah, and I'm actually really excited about the process that we've kind of worked out because, I'd like to do more of these. If this next one if this one with Tyrell is a hit, who's to say we don't just
keep it going?
Do another one. Yeah, do it. Find another artist and do another book because I could do a million of these. It's really fun.
So we can't go without a little basketball talk. So if you don't care about basketball, I would leave. So you're a Detroit Pistons fan. I'm an Indiana Pacers fan. Both of our teams are bad.
Yeah.
Which team do you think has the shortest path to not being bad of the two of them?
You still have Turner and Halliburton.
I'm pretty sure most people think that like Miles Turner is currently like a pre-Laker is how they're looking at him. Him and Buddy Hield. But yes,
you guys might be further out because you are set up right now to tear it down, right?
Yeah, I think we're rebuilding.
So we're done tearing it down, but we're not going to be good this year. This is our 0 year.
Yeah,
this is our zero issue.
Yes,
So I think that the Pistons, if they're going to be good, will be good. They'll start to be good next year, and then the year after that they'll be better. And the Pacers might be in a Wembanyama situation this year.
Yeah, or Scoot Henderson.
And then building from there. So I guess that you guys have to take a step back first.
I do think it's interesting because in like, I don't know, let's say the East of like 6 years ago, I think the Pistons would have a shot at getting into the play-in because the East is normally bad. The East is awesome now. Yeah,
if everything breaks right, they could win like I think 40 is tops.
Yeah,
40 games. But I think that they'll probably be closer to 30 wins, and they'll have some real moments by the end of the season. People will start talking about them a little bit about their bright future. But for now, I'm happy to see I just want to see everybody develop, and I want to see Isaiah Stewart hit threes, and I want to see Jaden Ivey be the fastest player I've ever seen.
Makes me really sad to see Jaden Ivey in a Pistons uniform. He should be in an Indiana Pacers uniform, but I do have to say it fits your team fits you really well right now. Not because they're bad, that is not what I'm saying, but because no matter what, they're going to be cool. Like they're kind of like the Grizzlies in the sense that like people are going to watch the Pistons on League Pass just because Cade's cool, Jaden Ivey's cool. I actually think that like Jalen Duran's going to be good.
I think he's going to be good too.
Yeah, I mean the tough thing is like you are kind of duplicative to a certain degree because like you got these two like badass like ball handler guys, and then you also have these like two centers. I actually think I think Isaiah Stewart's really good.
Yeah,
and then Sadiq Bey is good. There's a lot of good players.
I think that they. This is honestly, I'm a sports fan. My favorite time is this time when you see them building towards something.
Yeah, it could be anything.
Because once they get good, then I get stressed out.
Yeah.
This is just fun.
Yeah.
This is just icing. Like the Tigers, for example, I'm a baseball fan, and I just am done. I'm done because
they've been building for so long.
They haven't built anything. All the players that they built are here. Yeah. And there's nothing left. And
Torkelson was bad.
Anything. Yeah. Well, I mean, I still think he could be good, but
yeah.
But they have a bad farm system.
Yeah.
They have a bad major league team. There's nothing exciting about this other than Riley Green. I love Riley Green, but I'm not enjoying it. I'm not stressed about it. But I'm also not positive about it.
Yeah.
But the Pistons, I'm excited to just see them. I'm excited to see them lose a bunch of games. I'll watch all of them.
They'll be fun while they do it. Actually, I'm excited about this Pacers season because like the last few years have been really depressing, and it's just been like our ceiling is like mediocre, and now it's like I can see a path, and like Halliburton is super fun, which makes it really easy to root for. And he also seems like he likes being there as opposed to a lot of the players who just seem kind of miserable at times.
Right.
It is interesting that you brought that up, though, because I am also a New England Patriots fan. And when they were just winning titles and always in Super Bowls and stuff, this sounds like the biggest, like, humble brag, like, you know, front runner type stuff. But I mean it completely sincerely. It was actually kind of miserable, like, watching the Super Bowl, because you're expected to win. And, like, when you don't win, everyone just dunks on you. And when you do win, everyone's like, of course you won. That's what you're supposed to do. It actually got kind of boring, especially towards the end. I was kind of like, I'm ready for Brady to go.
Right. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, I hear you. See what you guys can really do without him. But when the Pistons were good in 2004, when they won the title and everything, that was so much fun because it happened very quickly.
Yeah.
But after they won the title, like, that next finals is like the most stressed I've ever been. Like, I was just upset all the time leading up to the games. Like, oh my God, you know. And that team was. I mean, those games were, you know, where they were like 80-78.
Oh my God, yeah.
And there were rock fights. It was so stressful. I still loved that they won because the releases feel so good, but man, leading up to it was terrifying.
I saw one of those games on like NBA TV Classics or something like that, and I'm like, there is nothing classic about this.
Yeah,
there's nothing
guys
enjoyable
taking
about
18-footers.
Oh my God,
cranking them off the rim.
The offense is just not great. I mean, that team was a lot of fun, especially once you guys got Sheed. But at the same time, it was. You're right. Rock fight is perfect. It is kind of amazing though, because if you look at like Rip Hamilton would be a perfect player for today. Except for the fact that he mostly shot long twos.
He'd know how to. He'd figure out how to shoot threes though.
It's funny that you think about that. Where like just 15 years ago, people in the NBA were like, you know what, I don't need to shoot threes, and now everyone's like, I am only going to shoot threes, including Isaiah Stewart, who is like 7 foot tall and weighs like 300 pounds or something. He's gigantic.
Yeah, he's like the strongest guy in the league, and he's going to be shooting threes.
I'm excited for the season, even though my team's going to be terrible. I will get League Pass, though, just so I can watch your Pistons and fantasize about Jaden Ivey eventually being an Indiana Pacer. But, Ryan, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talk about the Detroit Pistons, Vanish, the 90s, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Ryan Stegman. You can find him on Twitter at Ryan Stegman and his work in the upcoming Vanish at Image Comics. Love Off Panel and want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Mike Hansel, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Jingo Boren, James Tyne IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Devin Fitzsimons, Nick Walker, Patrick Quill, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Nicholas Palmieri, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Van de Ven, Brian, Submed Industries, Raj Patel, Jack Mulqueen, Kyle, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Elliot Metz, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Scott Buwan, Michael Tunk, Canadian by Proxy, Johnny Cannon, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon DePills, Patrick Power, Declan Shelby, Dan Gurino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Puller, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Estlin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grumbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mazel, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Brendan Fletcher, Jonathan Nilsson, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert Nicolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.